Now in Granada, it's time to turn another page in the gardener's diary.
Hello and welcome once again to the programme. This week, John Ravenscroft's getting right down to earth with a worm's eye view of compost. And Nigel Snow will be cutting a swathe through a jungle of secateurs and pruning tools.
Thank you, Judith. Like many of you, I'm going to grow an apple in a tub as a patio plant. And in doing so, I know I'm not going to see serious quantities of fruit. I'm doing this for fun. It will be rather fun to see these in fruit in a tub on our patio. But in doing it, I want to give this best possible chance. So I've chosen a half beer barrel, or in my case, a half whiskey barrel. The reason is, it's very broad and therefore stable. And also, by having it with this crenellated edge like this, I believe I won't get the shrinking and gappiness which I've otherwise seen. And also, by having the extra steel band here, that too will help. You could use, and a lot of us do use, terracotta or look-alike, which this is, and while it's handsome, it's tapered. And in our exposed site, it would spend more time blown over than it would being vertical. So this is what I've chosen for the job, rather than that. In here, I've already put about 4 or 5 pounds worth of a proprietary soilless compost, like this. And as you can see, already I've only managed to half fill the tub. So, for several reasons, one to save cost, but others too, we've added some of our own garden soil. And this has got some clay in it. This will help to hold water, because our problem with this is going to be drying out. It'll add weight for stability, so don't have to handle it too much when you've made it. And it will save quite a bit on cost. Now, the tree I've chosen, for the north of England I'd use James Grieve, and for the south of England I'd use Red Devil. But in each case, it's a 3-year-old container-grown tree, which has had 1 year in the pot to make this root system, and here's some nice white healthy root, and it was a 2-year-old when it went in. That's important, I think. The join, or the graft join, is there. And in our planting, and we'll put this in the barrel here now, and I think, yes, I've got that depth right, because at the end we must have 1.5 inches here where we will hold water, or we'll never ever keep this moist. If we let the soil come up above this join, then we'll get rooting from the stem, and all our carefully controlled dwarfing habit, which we've got from this, what we call M27 rootstock, perhaps I should explain. These rootstocks were selected at Malling Research Station for their dwarfing characteristics. And M27 is the most dwarfing of the lot, which we need, but has a strong enough root system not to require a stake. Whereas M9 is also dwarf, but would require a stake. And how can we stake in a tub? Well, we can't, obviously. So that's the right depth, and later I shall be adding some more soil and putting a few herbs around this. But to begin with, I'd better have a look at the shape of this tree. Those are fruiting spurs. There's another. They're rather furry looking. Leave those well alone. Branches like this will never do anything. We do nothing with those. A branch like this is quite whippy and thin, and all I'm going to do with that one is just tip it here, like that, just to encourage it to hang down and fruit. Here's another inconsequential, quite weak stem here. Again, we'll cut that one off just about there. And I'm left with these, which are the framework of the tree. This one I cut to an upright bud, so, and the strongest one is this one, but it's not going where I want it to. So the very strongest one I cut the hardest and turn it back outwards again, and the other one also turned outwards. Those are the framework. This one doesn't count either, so that will just be tipped. So in a year's time, these will be hanging down. The new growth will come from there. Now, as this is here for a long time, I have already added some charcoal. It's just something I think is worth doing. The soil we've got here, as I said, came from our garden and is mixed a little with good compost. We've had a lot of rain lately and it's pretty sticky. It'll be all right. It takes a huge amount. But luckily, we'll put this on a sack truck. And this certainly isn't going to blow away. So if we settle that down now, so like this, and my levels are about right. We pack it down, so. Like that. Can add a bit more. So, and now we can think about the herbs that we're going to put around it, because that will help to make it really interesting. Here's a little selection of herbs: marjoram, thyme, silver thyme, and various other thymes, so it'll be marjoram and thyme. I have 5 plants there, and if they are just spaced like this, I plant with my hands. I've really always believed that if the soil is not loose enough for me to plant with my hands, heaven help the glove manufacturers, they wouldn't get very fat out of me, then it isn't prepared properly. The 2 little thymes will go at the back here. So, I wouldn't put mint in here. I think mint would take the whole job over. So there we are. Need the labels, we know them. And that's reasonably level and solid. There's 1.5 to 2 inches here for water. Now, as well as doing these, I could have used pears. I wouldn't use peaches, because if they dry out, we'd get red spider. And I could have used the dwarf plum on pixie rootstock. And in our case, we're going to give this automatic irrigation through a drip hose system, which we shall be using in May, and you'll see us using. Well, I think we'll have about 6 of these, but for now, I think I'll just have a break while I prepare for the next one.
Amazingly, you can get all of the people in the world standing together on the Isle of Wight. You can squeeze 24 people into a mini. And you can get all the fibre you'd find in 9 slices of brown bread concentrated in a single bowl of Kellogg's All Bran. Kellogg's All Bran, a concentrated fibre provider.
Kotex understands that you want to enjoy every day. That's why we designed the first panty liner to offer light protection, with the added security of tabs. New Kotex Brevia Plus. It stays put when you don't. The latest addition to the Kotex range, Brevia Plus, confidently Kotex.
Hey, don't I know you from somewhere?
That's original.
Emerson High, 1975. You're in my class.
I was your teacher.
What helps keep skin looking young? Oil of Ulay twice a day. It's quickly absorbed deep down, moisturizing where you need it most.
Miss Fitzhenry?
Bugsy Brown.
Oil of Ulay twice a day.
Wow.
The secret of young-looking skin.
Paul Eyre bring you special offers as their biggest ever carpet sale ends this week. Save over 90% on this Wilton. It's only $1.95 a square yard when you buy the underlay at $2.99 a square yard. Save 75% on these prints, now $1.49 a square yard. This bedroom carpet is down to just $1.99 a square yard, a saving of £3 a square yard. And there's cords at only 89p a square yard. Plus, you can still buy any carpet, pay just over 10% deposit and pay the balance in August. Paul Eyre's biggest ever carpet sale ends this week.
Hello and welcome back to part 2. A vital part of any gardener's armament are secateurs. And I'm sure really that the art of cutting nice green timber with these sharp tools is what leads people to prune everything in the garden. They just like to actually experience the cleanness of the cut. Now this particular type of secateur I'm holding here, I've had this type of secateur for 20 years or so, and they're absolutely ideal. They work on the principle of having two blades, this one here, which has a sharp cutting edge, and this one here, which has a sharpened edge, and both of them pass as they cut the stem that you are pruning. Now this makes for a very good cut, very clean cut, but it does mean that you have to support the piece you're pruning off with your left hand if it's of any size at all, because there's no other way of stopping it from ripping. Now these are ideal, and you actually find that as you use these you need to sharpen them. They do get blunt, and it's very difficult to sharpen secateurs. So on this particular type they provide a spare blade, which is ideal. You can then swap the blade and your secateurs will be just as good as new. In fact, some of the firms actually say you can send your secateurs back to them and have a good sort of MOT on them to keep them in good order. You will find that secateurs are left-handed and right-handed, and you can see on this particular type that I can move the clip that holds it shut with my thumb without letting go. That's because I'm right-handed and these are right-handed secateurs. On this particular model there's no clip there at all because these are left-handed secateurs and it's over the other side. So it is important, if you're planning to buy secateurs for someone, you do ascertain what hand they use. Another feature of this type of secateur is this rolling handle. And this is quite a new feature. It's something that's come in the last few years or so. And it does help. If you're doing a lot of pruning, it certainly does help to release the tension that your fingers do suffer. But it's a good innovation, and I'm sure it's going to be with us for a long time. The secateurs that were popular a number of years ago is this particular type, and this is what they call a roll cut. And here you have one blade that cuts, this one, and this blade doesn't cut at all. It just acts like an anvil. So the blade comes down against it and it traps the stem in between, and that way that's how it cuts through. While it's doing that, it does actually offer a bit of support to the stem, so that's quite good. You don't really need to be as conscious of ripping or tearing of bark, but it does mean that this blade, which is the sharpened one, is continually being blunted by this fixed blade. And in the original types they were brass, which was quite soft but still had a blunting effect. On this particular type they're plastic, and in some ways that's better because it's softer and the whole thing moves through easier. But they're all very good. I mean, there are such a huge range of secateurs available. You can pay anything from £3 to £30 and get something that will suit your particular needs. If you have any real big jobs to do in the garden, then these guillotines are absolutely ideal. They will cut through, well, you can see a good 2-inch branch there, so if you're cutting down old hedges, if you're dealing with old shrub roses, these are the tools to do it. And having long handles means you can stay out the way at the same time, so you won't damage yourself. So a pair of these really are a necessity. Saws are another tool that I use a lot. I mean, I worked for years as an arborist, and these were with me as my constant companions. This particular one is probably the most versatile saw in the garden. It only cuts on the backward stroke. All these teeth point backwards. And it's very safe if you cut on the backward stroke. It's very, you don't get that skidding that can happen when the blade jumps off the wood and then it goes onto your hand, and it can be quite painful. So this particular type, you can sharpen it, which again is quite traditional, and it only cuts on the backward stroke. It's very fine, so you can get some really good pruning cuts done with it. This particular type is a bow saw, and here you have a totally different setup. The blade is pre-sharpened, it's high tensile steel, but it will cut for a long time. And the pointed nose is absolutely ideal for getting into those tight spaces. Well, that's all from me for now, and I'll hand you over to John, who's going to be looking at some compost.
Thank you, Nigel. Nowadays, almost all of us buy our composts ready mixed. And I divide the compost world into the pre-John Innes era, the pre-University of California mixes era, and today. Now, before John Innes, we relied on recipes from books I used to have when I was a lot younger, like this, Preston's Greenhouse. And there were prescriptive potions contributed by head gardeners, which they had found worked for plants which they grew to perfection, which involved things like cross-eyed cow manure and pinches of all sorts of things, but they worked. But do remember that composts were not used in volume. John Innes was a research station founded by John Innes at Merton in Surrey. And it did work on problems in gardening and horticulture, and just before the war, during and after, they produced their standardised compost, which we all used. And it was based on soil or loam, and there is a difference, and we had to mix 7 of loam, 3 of peat and 2 of sand, but the loam had to be greasy sort of stuff, like this is. You can just see that. Now, I've got a tray here of what today would be called a John Innes compost. And although there is some soil in there, by no means is it the sticky, greasy sort of loam I remember which we used when this was all important to us. And we had to cut our turfs about August, 4 inches thick, stack them upside down with lime every now and again, and then cut vertically and then sterilise it. So that was a very labour-intensive compost to produce, extremely good, but at the time when this was all dominant, there was not a big consumer market, and there was no such thing as a nursery stock container industry which uses such enormous volumes. In about 1960 or so, we heard about what were called the UC mixes. That was University of California peat and sand mixes, and we all adopted them. And really what it was a typical peat, like say this, so we had 3 parts of peat and 1 part of sand, and some fertilizer. Now, to begin with, we used sand that was as fine as this, but maybe not quite. This is the celebrated Bedford silver sand, which we used to use in propagation. And then we moved to a readily available concrete sand, sharp, which is good, and which a lot of us use today even now. That's the sort of sand, if I were you, I'd be looking for, a sharp concrete sand that doesn't leave behind much stain on your hand, because the stain behind would be the clay fraction. After a while, we moved to using a grit, because the one thing we'd managed was to produce a compost which was rather solid. And today, we have, all industries are full of jargon, and we greatly prize what we call air-filled porosity. And all it really means is that there are some air spaces in the compost for the roots to breathe and take in oxygen, which they need. In these more solid composts, there was not enough of it. And also, as we overhead irrigated, we consolidated the compost. And every time you water, you do that. You settle the compost down a bit more. Think of what happens as the tide recedes off a beach. That's what's happening. So we gradually moved to a compost which was peat and grit, and now is almost entirely, say, peat and bark. And the only reason we have grit in now is to add weight and stability to a pot which would otherwise blow over in the slightest wind. But peat is not one substance. Here are 3 different peats, depending on the depth they were dug from and the plants from which they were made. This is a typical black, greasy Somerset peat. And that is what you find in grow bags, and this came from a grow bag. While nutritionally it will break down and be good, structurally it is poor, and it's not what I'd look for in a compost to give me that air-filled porosity. This is a typical Irish peat here. It's more from the surface than the Somerset peat, and is full of sphagnum with some sedge, and is what we're looking for when we're making a compost, because it has structure. A peat we shall have to get to terms with is this Finnish Baltic peat, which is even younger, even more spongy, and we're learning how to use that in conjunction with composted bark.
Hello, John.
Hi, Judith.
I brought the tip of the week in with me this week.
Yes. Primula obconica, popular houseplant, no problem to me, but this is possibly the plant which people get dermatitis from, and I don't know whether this is many people that get it from this particular primula, but because of this it's rather damned the primula race, and I wish it hadn't, because I believe it is purely this primula that produces this, and sometimes I think way back I remember primula wanda. But the primrose, which we have in our greenhouses and later in our gardens, which is grown in such quantity, has none of these drawbacks. But also, there's little need to handle this once you've got it in your house. And I don't believe it's a very high percentage of the population that get dermatitis from it.
Would you recommend gloves then?
In handling it, I've never had that problem, but yes, I think I would. But so that you don't confuse it, this is what we mean by the ordinary garden or houseplant primrose. And that appears to me to be perfectly safe. And there shouldn't be any confusion between this one and that one.
Right, I just have to remember that
Yeah.
one. If you'd like one of our fact sheets, you can write to us at Gardener's Diary, Bridgemere Garden World, near Nantwich, Cheshire, CW5 7QB. Gardener's Diary, Bridgemere Garden World, near Nantwich, Cheshire, CW5 7QB. And of course, as always, in just a couple of minutes, the phone lines will be open again. The number to ring if you'd like an answer instantly to your gardening queries is 09365 455. Now, next week we shall be looking at buying young plants, I think, among other things, won't we, John?
And growing them.
And growing them too. So from John and from me, for now, until next week, it's bye-bye.
Goodbye.